just beyond the escalator, and Xiang still totally confused. And then finally, when Xiang and her son reached the top and stepped off, Zhang suddenly understood what these employees were referencing, but by now it was too late. Moments later, Xiang's husband Hbon, who was still down below on the 6th floor at the playground, he heard the sound of his wife and son screaming over near the escalator, and so instinctively he bolted over to the escalator. He didn't see his wife, didn't see his son, and he began going up the escalator when someone at the top screamed at him to stop and get off the escalator, and so he did, and right then a mall employee came running down the other side, carrying his son, and this person handed the son over to Shang's husband, and this employee, who clearly was completely shocked by whatever had happened up above, just shook their head. It would turn out earlier that day, those mall employees who were at the top gesturing to Xiang, they had discovered a defect with the metal platform that sits right at the top of the escalator on the 7th floor, basically. When you get off this escalator, it's the platform you step onto first. They had found there was something wrong with it. It was unstable, but instead of immediately blocking off the escalator to make sure nobody walked on it and then go get it repaired, these employees just kind of nonchalantly allowed the escalator to continue, stationed a couple of them at the top to make sure nobody, used the escalator, and then called for a repairman, but the repairman hadn't shown up and fixed this problem by the time Shang and her son boarded the escalator, and these employees at the top knew this huge issue with the platform they were going to step on the second they get off, but they failed to communicate the danger to Shang and her son as they were coming up. They just kind of broadly gesticulated that there was some issue up here and to sort of watch out for it, but Shang had no idea. And so by the time she got to the top and stepped off the escalator onto that platform, well, the defect with the platform is that it caved in with any weight. And so she fell into the escalator with the teeth of the escalator was rotating, and as she was getting pulled into her death, her final moment captured on video, and she took her son and thrusted him to the employees, saving his life before she disappeared and died inside the inner workings of the escalator. Following Zhang's death, there was a full-scale investigation, and quickly there were massive safety failures identified on the part of the company who made the escalator and also on the mall itself. 2 people were ultimately arrested in connection with Xiang's death and the safety failures, and the mall reportedly offered to pay some settlement to Xiang's family. However, the details of that settlement have not been made public. Music. One morning in November of 1997, a police captain named Jeffrey Lewis, along with his partner, parked their squad car near the Manatee River in Bradenton, Florida, which is a small city just south of Tampa. A few minutes earlier, the Bradenton Police Department had received a call from this frantic man who had said he had found something suspicious that had washed up on the shore of this river, and so Captain Lewis and his partner were there to investigate. And so as soon as they got out of their squad car, this man who had called the police, he saw them and waved them down, and he was pointing at something in the sand. And so Captain Lewis and his partner, they walked over, and before they even talked to this guy, they just looked down at what he was pointing at, and right away they could see why he called the police, because there sitting on the sand was a severed human hand. And so the instant Captain Lewis saw this, his first thought was actually just alligators, because there were alligators that swam in the Manatee River, and people were told about them and were told, not to go swimming here, but people still did. And so his thought was, well, maybe one of the alligators got a swimmer. However, when Captain Lewis looked at the hand more closely, he could tell right away that probably did not happen, because where the hand had been cut off from the body, the cut was almost surgical. It was very, very neat, whereas if an alligator had ripped the hand off, it would be rough, but this almost looked like a surgeon had carefully removed the hand. And so what the signal to Captain Lewis is, this hand very likely represented a murder victim, somebody who killed this person, cut their body up, and one of their body parts is now washed ashore. And so Captain Lewis turned to his partner and told him to call for backup, and within an hour police officers were scouring the Manatee River looking for the body that belonged to this hand. Meanwhile, the captain bagged this hand as evidence and brought it to the county sheriff's crime lab, hoping that forensic experts could potentially figure out who the victim was using fingerprints. However, when he actually handed over the hand to these forensic technicians, they told Captain Lewis that it was very likely going to be impossible to try to pull prints from this hand because the hand was very badly decomposed and water damaged, but they told Captain Lewis that despite this being a total long shot, they would still give it a try, and so really all Captain Lewis had was this hand, and so he just kind of waited for information from the crime lab about the fingerprints, and before long, the waiting went from days to weeks to months with no fingerprints, and so with no fingerprints and no other breakthroughs in this case, Captain Lewis moved on to other cases, that is until June of 1998, when Captain Lewis was sitting in his office doing some work when he suddenly got a call from the crime lab about the hand. An employee told Captain Lewis they had finally made a breakthrough when they could get the prints off this hand. At first, they had moved to this very complicated technique where basically they would peel individual layers of skin off the hand and sort of piece together all the information to get a print, and amazingly, this technique worked. And so not only did they now have this print, but they had also already run this print through the Florida State database, and they had gotten a match. The hand belonged to a man named Willie Suttle. As soon as he hung up, Captain Lewis opened up a new tab on his computer and began researching Willie Suttle to figure out who this person was. And he quickly found through public employment records that Willie had been a retired garbage collector, and then also Captain Lewis looked at police records and discovered that Willie had a minor criminal history. But what really stood out in his research about Willie was that Willie had never been reported missing. Willie had instead been reported dead right there in the public records that Captain Lewis was looking at. He found Willie's death certificate, and this document said Willie had died of natural causes 5 months prior to his hand washing up on shore, and also it said Willie had been buried in a local cemetery and no police had ever been involved in his death because no crime had been committed. And so Captain Lewis was baffled. None of this made any sense. If Willie had died of natural causes and been buried over a year ago, then how did his severed hand wind up on the shore of the Manatee River the next day, which was Friday, June 26th? Captain Lewis, along with a few other police officers, went to the cemetery where Willie had been buried, and they exhumed his casket, and when they opened it up, they actually